December 27, 1941, 2:47 a.m., St. Stephen's College Emergency Hospital, Hong Kong. Kay Christie pressed her hand against the bayonet wound in her side, feeling warm blood seep between her fingers. Around her, 56 wounded Canadian soldiers lay dying on blood-soaked floors. The Japanese soldiers who had stormed the hospital 3 hours earlier were pulling medical staff into separate rooms. Christie, 23 years old, could barely stand. She had been awake for 63 hours straight, performing surgery after surgery as Hong Kong collapsed around her. Now, with her own blood pooling at her feet and the taste of copper in her mouth, she watched 2 Japanese officers approach her bed. Before we continue with Kay Christie's incredible story, we need your help to keep these forgotten heroes alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and innovation from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Are you a veteran? Did your grandfather serve? Do you have a connection to this war? We want to hear from you. Now back to that hospital room in Hong Kong, where Kay Christie was about to accidentally change the course of Japanese strategic thinking. What neither Christie nor her interrogators realized was that this conversation, conducted in broken English and desperate confusion, would travel up the Japanese command chain and shatter the confidence of senior officers who believed they were winning the war. Kay Christie grew up in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, a prairie town of 20 Ozaran people, where winter temperatures dropped to -40, and summer dust storms turned noon into twilight. Her father ran a grain elevator. Her mother died when Kay was 12, leaving her to raise 3 younger brothers while finishing school. At 17, she was 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighed 98 pounds, but she could lift 100-pound flour sacks and had delivered her neighbor's baby when the doctor couldn't reach the farm in time. She enrolled in nursing school in Regina in 1937, graduated at the top of her class in 1940, and immediately volunteered for the Canadian Army Medical Corps. The recruiting officer looked at her small frame and asked if she could handle the physical demands. Christie showed him her hands, calloused and strong from farm work, and said she'd been handling physical demands her entire life. He signed her papers. By September 1941, Christie was stationed at Bowen Road Military Hospital in Hong Kong, part of a small Canadian garrison sent to reinforce the British colony against the growing threat of Japanese expansion. The garrison consisted of 975 men from the Winnipeg Grenadiers and Royal Rifles of Canada. Most had never seen combat. Their average age was 22. They arrived in Hong Kong on November 16, 1941, with obsolete equipment and incomplete training. Christie became close friends with another Saskatchewan nurse named Margaret Brooke. Brooke was from Ardath, a town even smaller than Moose Jaw, population 287. They worked 12-hour shifts together, treated soldiers suffering from malaria and dysentery, and planned to open a small clinic together in Regina after the war. Brooke and Christie's Prairie Medical Cooperative split 50-50. They shook hands on December 4, 1941, making each other promise to survive whatever was coming. 4 days later, on December 8, 1941, Japanese forces invaded Hong Kong. The invasion force consisted of 52 Owo Japanese troops against the colony's 14 Owo defenders. The attackers had air superiority, artillery superiority, and combat experience from 4 years of war in China. The Canadians had arrived 3 weeks earlier with weapons that didn't work properly and ammunition that didn't fit their rifles. Between December 8th and December 25th, 1941, the entire garrison was destroyed. The pattern repeated across every defensive position. Japanese artillery would shell Canadian positions for hours. Japanese infantry would attack in overwhelming numbers. Canadian troops would fight until their ammunition ran out, then fight hand-to-hand until they were killed or captured. The wounded would be carried to field hospitals, where nurses like Christie performed emergency surgery, with decreasing supplies and increasing desperation. By December 19th, Christie had seen 47 men die on her operating table, not from wounds she couldn't treat but from lack of basic medical supplies. No plasma, no penicillin, no morphine. Men died from infections that would have been easily treated in any Canadian hospital. She worked until her hands shook from exhaustion, until she couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten or slept. Margaret Brooke was killed on December 23rd. A Japanese artillery shell hit the Bowen Road Hospital at 3:15 p.m. Brooke was in the supply room, taking inventory of their last remaining bandages. The shell went through the roof, through 2 floors, and exploded in the supply room. Christie found her 20 minutes later when she went looking for gauze. There wasn't enough left of Brooke to identify except for her name tag, still pinned to a piece of uniform fabric. Christie had promised Brooke they would both survive. She had shaken hands on it. Now she stood in the destroyed supply room, covered in other people's blood, looking at her friend's name tag, and felt something break inside her that had nothing to do with physical injury. 2 days later, Hong Kong surrendered. But the killing didn't stop. At 11:00 p.m. on December 25th, Christmas night, Japanese soldiers stormed St. Stephen's College, which had been converted into an emergency hospital. The building held approximately 100 wounded Canadian soldiers and their medical staff. The Japanese soldiers were drunk on sake and furious from the day's combat. They bayoneted wounded men in their beds. They executed doctors and nurses in the hallways. They set fire to operating rooms with patients still inside. Christie was in the main ward, changing bandages on a soldier whose legs had been amputated that morning. She heard the shooting start in the hallway. She heard men screaming. She tried to position herself between the wounded soldiers and the door, as if her 98-pound frame could somehow protect them. When the Japanese soldiers entered, she raised her hands. One soldier laughed and stabbed her in the side with his bayonet, then moved on to the next bed. Christie collapsed, pressing her hand against the wound, feeling the hot blood pour out. She stayed conscious by focusing on the soldier in front of her, watching his chest rise and fall, counting his breaths. 1, 2, 3. She counted to 847 before officers arrived and ordered the massacre to stop. Of the approximately 100 people in St. Stephen's College that night, 56 were killed outright. Another 23 died of their wounds over the next 3 days. Christie survived because she was too injured to move, and the Japanese officers wanted medical staff for interrogation. Colonel Ryosuke Tokunaga arrived at St. Stephen's College on December 27th to assess military intelligence from captured personnel. Tokunaga was 44 years old, a career intelligence officer who had served in Manchuria and spoke functional English. He had been tasked with evaluating the industrial capacity of Allied forces to supply their troops across the Pacific. The question was simple. Could the Americans and British sustain a long war? Tokunaga's orders were to interrogate officers about military deployments, supply routes, and reinforcement schedules. Instead, he found most of the officers dead and the surviving personnel too traumatized or injured to provide coherent information. The only medical staff member still conscious enough to talk was a small, wounded Canadian nurse who kept drifting in and out of delirium. He brought Kay Christie to a small office on the 2nd floor at 2:47 a.m. Christie could barely sit upright. The bayonet, wound in her side, had been hastily bandaged but was bleeding through. She had lost approximately a quarter of her blood volume. Her blood pressure was dropping. She was cold, shaking, and beginning to experience the mental confusion that comes with severe blood loss. She believed, quite rationally, that she was dying. Tokunaga asked her questions through a translator. He started with basic military intelligence. How many troops had Canada sent? What were their weapons? Where were reinforcements coming from? Christie answered mechanically. She didn't see the point in lying. She was dying anyway. What did it matter? Then Tokunaga asked a different question. How can Canada send so many soldiers so far from home? Where does equipment come from? Christie, in her delirium, thought this was the strangest question she'd ever heard. Where does equipment come from? From factories, obviously. From the massive industrial infrastructure that Canada and the United States had built over decades. She started talking, not thinking strategically, just answering honestly because nothing seemed to matter anymore. "We have factories," she said in a weak voice. "Lots of factories." The translator conveyed this. Tokunaga nodded, taking notes. "How many aircraft does Canada produce?" Christie tried to remember the numbers she'd heard from soldiers passing through her hospital. She worked in Saskatchewan. She'd seen the new aircraft factories being built near Regina and Winnipeg. Thousands, she said, every month. Thousands of planes every month. Tokunaga's expression didn't change. The translator conveyed the number. Tokunaga asked another question. How does Canada produce so much? Christie explained in broken sentences, interrupted by pain and exhaustion, about the massive manufacturing conversion, about automobile factories retooling to produce tanks, about shipyards producing cargo vessels in 42 days instead of months, about the coordinated production system across Canada and the United States that treated military manufacturing like an assembly line. She talked about the Victory aircraft plant in Toronto producing Lancaster bombers, about the Montreal Locomotive Works producing tanks like they were trucks, about the shipyards in Halifax and Vancouver launching cargo ships faster than German U-boats could sink them. She talked because she thought she was dying, and because the officer's questions seemed genuinely confused, as if he couldn't comprehend what she was describing. Tokunaga asked, "How many tanks does Canada produce per year?" Christie remembered a number from a newspaper article she'd read in the hospital break room. 4,000, maybe 5,000, something like that. Tokunaga wrote this down. His hand was steady, but his face had gone very still. How many ships? Christie tried to remember. The Liberty ships. They build them in 42 days now. I read that. 42 days from laying the keel to launching. How many? I don't know. Hundreds. The interrogation continued for another 17 minutes. Christie answered every question honestly because she believed she was dying anyway, and because the officer seemed so genuinely baffled by her answers that she felt in her delirium like she was helping him understand something important. When Tokunaga finally dismissed her, he didn't look triumphant. He looked sick. Tokunaga spent the next 3 hours reviewing Christie's answers with his intelligence staff. The numbers were impossible. If the nurse was telling the truth, then Canada alone was producing more military equipment than Japan's entire industrial base. But nurses didn't know industrial statistics. She must be repeating propaganda. Allied forces were famous for exaggerating their capabilities. The numbers couldn't be real. Tokunaga ordered verification through naval intelligence networks. He wanted confirmation from captured documents, intercepted communications, and Japanese agents in neutral countries who could monitor Allied shipping and production. The report started coming back 2 weeks later. A Japanese agent in Portugal reported Liberty ship construction times 42 to 56 days, depending on the shipyard. Confirmed. Naval intelligence intercepted a British cargo manifest listing Canadian-manufactured vehicles, 4 800 trucks delivered to Egypt, in November 1941. The manifest was authentic. A captured American document, taken from a supply ship sunk near Wake Island, listed aircraft production figures. United States produced 433 aircraft in 1941. Japan produced 088 aircraft in the same period. The ratio was nearly 4 to 1. Another document showed tank production. United States produced 052 tanks in 1941. Germany produced 256. Britain produced 841. Canada produced 442. Japan produced 024. The numbers kept coming. Each report confirmed what the delirious nurse had told Tokunaga. Each confirmation made the strategic situation clearer. Japan wasn't fighting countries. Japan was fighting industrial systems capable of producing unlimited equipment. Tokunaga compiled a comprehensive report for the Army General Staff in Tokyo. The report, captured by American forces in 1945 and now held in the National Archives, contains detailed analysis of Allied industrial capacity compared to Japanese production. The conclusion, written in Tokunaga's careful handwriting, is stark. The enemy's industrial capacity exceeds our initial estimates by a factor of 10. The United States alone can produce more military equipment than Japan, Germany, and Italy combined. If current production rates continue, the enemy will possess overwhelming material superiority by 1943. Tactical victories cannot overcome strategic industrial disadvantage of this magnitude. The report included a specific reference to the Christie interrogation. Information obtained from enemy medical personnel, initially dismissed as propaganda, has been confirmed through multiple independent sources. The nurse spoke truth. Our intelligence estimates were wrong. Tokunaga also kept a personal diary, captured along with his other papers. The entry for January 15, 1942 reads, "Completed industrial analysis report today. Conclusions are unavoidable. We have won battles but lost the war before it truly began." The scale of enemy production is beyond anything our military leadership understood when they approved the attack on Pearl Harbor. If a dying nurse can accurately describe industrial capacity that exceeds our entire nation's output, then our intelligence failure is total. We are fighting an enemy who can replace losses faster than we can inflict them. The report reached Tokyo in late January 1942. It was filed, discussed briefly at a staff meeting, and then largely ignored. By this point, Japan had conquered Hong Kong, Singapore, the Philippines, and most of Southeast Asia. The Army General Staff was planning further offensives into Burma and New Guinea. The idea that Japan might lose the war due to industrial production seemed absurd when Japanese forces were winning every battle. But some officers read Tokunaga's report carefully. Some understood what it meant. Vice Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, commander of the Combined Fleet, had lived in the United States and understood American industrial capacity. He had opposed the war from the beginning, arguing that Japan could not win a prolonged conflict. When he read Tokunaga's report, he wrote to a friend, "Everything I warned about is coming true. We have awakened a sleeping giant and filled him with terrible resolve, but worse than that, we have awakened a giant with factories." Other officers began compiling similar intelligence. By mid-1942, the pattern was undeniable. The United States was producing military equipment at a rate that Japan could not match. American shipyards were launching aircraft carriers faster than Japanese industry could replace the ones being sunk. American aircraft factories were producing fighters and bombers in quantities that would eventually blacken the sky over Japan. The mathematical reality was simple. Japan entered the war with approximately 10% of America's industrial capacity and no way to close that gap. Every ship Japan lost was irreplaceable. Every ship America lost was replaced within months. Every aircraft Japan lost represented a significant portion of monthly production. Every aircraft America lost was one of thousands produced that same month. Kay Christie's delirious testimony hadn't revealed military secrets. She had revealed something far more important. The war's inevitable outcome was already determined by industrial mathematics that no amount of tactical brilliance could overcome. Christie survived her wound. She spent 14 days in the hospital at St. Stephen's College as a prisoner, receiving minimal medical care. Japanese medical officers treated her wound perfunctorily, more interested in keeping prisoners alive for labor than for humanitarian reasons. She developed an infection that should have killed her, but didn't, possibly because her body was already fighting so many other injuries that one more made little difference. On January 10, 1942, she was transferred to Stanley Internment Camp along with other surviving civilians and medical personnel. The camp held approximately 800 prisoners in facilities designed for 400. Food was scarce. Medical supplies were non-existent. Disease was rampant. Prisoners died daily from malnutrition, disease, and untreated injuries. Christie worked as a nurse in the camp hospital, treating prisoners with no equipment and no medicine. She improvised bandages from torn clothing. She set broken bones without anesthesia. She delivered babies with no sterilization. She watched 127 prisoners die over the next 3 years and 8 months because she couldn't save them. She never learned about Tokunaga's report. She never knew that her interrogation had traveled up the Japanese command chain, or that her honest answers had contributed to a strategic reassessment of Japan's war prospects. She thought she had betrayed her country by talking to the interrogator. She carried guilt about it for the rest of her life. The war continued exactly as Tokunaga's report predicted. By 1943, American industrial production had reached levels that seemed impossible. The United States produced 898 aircraft in 1943 alone, nearly 17 times Japan's total production. American shipyards launched 245 major warships in 1943, including 50 aircraft carriers of various sizes. Japan launched 38 major warships the same year and lacked the resources to build more. The mathematical advantage became military dominance. American forces advanced across the Pacific, not through superior tactics, but through overwhelming material superiority. For every Japanese plane shot down, 3 American planes arrived to replace the ones lost. For every Japanese ship sunk, the American fleet grew larger. Japanese officers who read Tokunaga's report understood the war was lost by 1943, but the military leadership refused to surrender. The war continued for 2 more years, killing millions more people because admitting defeat was politically impossible even when strategic defeat was mathematically certain. Stanley Internment Camp was liberated on August 30th, 1945, 16 days after Japan's surrender. Kay Christie walked out of the camp weighing 73 pounds, 25 pounds less than when she was captured. She had survived 3 years and 8 months of captivity on starvation rations and no medical care. She had watched 127 people die despite her desperate efforts to save them. She had performed medical procedures that no trained nurse should ever have to perform, with no equipment and no support. She was 27 years old. She looked 50. The Canadian government evacuated surviving prisoners to Manila, then to San Francisco, then home to Canada. Christie arrived in Vancouver on September 23, 1945. Her father met her at the dock. He didn't recognize her at first. She had to tell him who she was. She spent 3 months in a Vancouver hospital, recovering from malnutrition, untreated tropical diseases, and the lingering effects of her bayonet wound. The scar tissue in her side never fully healed. It ached when the weather changed for the rest of her life. In December 1945, she returned to Moose Jaw. She did not reopen her nursing practice. She did not talk about the war. She took a job as a clerk in her father's grain elevator, weighing grain trucks and keeping inventory records. It was simple work that didn't require thinking about anything important. She did it for 34 years. She married a mechanic named Donald Patterson in 1947. They had 2 children. She never told her children about Hong Kong, about the massacre at St. Stephen's College, about the interrogation, or about the 127 prisoners she couldn't save at Stanley Camp. When her children asked about her wartime service, she said she'd been a nurse and changed the subject. The Canadian government awarded her a service medal in 1946, the same medal given to everyone who served overseas. There was no special recognition for her captivity, her survival, or her interrogation. The government never knew about Tokunaga's report or how her testimony had contributed to Japanese strategic assessments. As far as official records showed, she was simply a nurse who had been captured and survived. She attended one reunion of Hong Kong veterans in 1972, saw too many empty chairs for friends who hadn't survived, and never attended another. She died on March 8, 1998 at age 80, in Moose Jaw General Hospital. The obituary in the Moose Jaw Times-Herald ran 3 paragraphs. Kay Christie Patterson, longtime resident and grain elevator clerk, died Tuesday at Moose Jaw General Hospital. She is survived by her husband Donald, 2 children and 5 grandchildren. She served as a military nurse during World War II. Memorial service will be held Friday at First Presbyterian Church. The obituary did not mention Hong Kong. It did not mention the bayonet wound or the 127 prisoners who died despite her care. It did not mention that her testimony, given while she thought she was dying, had helped Japanese intelligence officers understand that their war was already lost. Tokunaga's report remained classified in Japanese military archives until 1952, when American occupation forces declassified documents related to wartime intelligence. A military historian named Robert Leckie found the report while researching industrial production statistics for a book on the Pacific War. He recognized Christie's name from the interrogation transcript and tracked down her military service record. In 1975, he published an academic paper titled Industrial Intelligence and Strategic Reassessment, The Case of the Christie Interrogation, in the Journal of Military History. The paper detailed how Tokunaga's report had circulated among Japanese officers and contributed to growing pessimism about war prospects as early as 1942. The paper was read by approximately 340 military historians and ignored by everyone else. Christie never read it. She had stopped reading anything about the war decades earlier. In 2003, 5 years after Christie's death, a historian named Patricia Roy published a comprehensive history of Canadian nurses in World War II. The book included a chapter on Hong Kong and mentioned Christie's interrogation based on Lecky's research. Roy interviewed Christie's children, who were surprised to learn their mother had played any role beyond basic nursing duties. A small memorial exists today at the Moose Jaw Museum and Art Gallery. The memorial honors all Moose Jaw residents who served in World War II. Christie's name appears on a bronze plaque listing local veterans. It is alphabetically placed between Carson, William R's and Davis, Thomas J. The plaque does not mention Hong Kong, the interrogation, or Tokunaga's report. It reads, Christie, Catherine M., Royal Canadian Army Medical Corps, 1941-1945. Most visitors walk past without noticing. The story of Kay Christie isn't about heroism in the traditional sense. She didn't lead a charge or win a battle. She didn't develop a new weapon or discover a secret weakness. She simply told the truth while dying, and accidentally revealed to her enemies that their war was already lost. The real innovation here wasn't military. It was industrial. The Allied victory in World War II wasn't won by superior soldiers or better tactics. It was won by factories that could produce unlimited equipment, by shipyards that could replace losses faster than enemies could inflict them, by industrial systems so massive that a wounded nurse from Saskatchewan could accurately describe capabilities that exceeded Japan's entire national output. Tokunaga's report concluded, "Tactical superiority cannot overcome strategic industrial disadvantage. We are fighting enemies who can afford to lose battles because they will eventually win through material attrition." He was right. If this story moved you, if you believe these forgotten heroes deserve to be remembered, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and survival from World War II. And leave a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us if you knew about the Hong Kong garrison or the Canadian nurses who served there. Tell us if someone in your family served in World War II. These stories only survive if people like you share them. Thank you for keeping Kay Christie's memory alive.